Raise your hand if you've ever been personally victimized by cowlicks. Good evening, I'm the Friendly Senpai, and today we're going to be talking about The Four Horsemen, a visual novel created by Nuclear Fission Software and released to Steam at some point this year. I don't remember which month. It tells the story of four teenage immigrants, or the children of immigrants, themed after the four horsemen of the apocalypse from the Book of Revelations. War is a rebellious older sister that struggles with PTSD, a dark family history, and racists confronting her on the streets. Death is a tech-savvy inventor that struggles with living up to the expectations of her friends and the rest of society. Famine is an anime fan living in poverty with his single father that has no idea what he wants out of life. And Pestilence is a stoner that wrestles with feelings of existential nihilism as he accepts that he will never be more than an unwanted guest in the country that he lives in. Their names may change depending on which fictional country you choose to play in, but their personalities and their stories all remain the same, even if they may play slightly differently. Now, throughout their stories, you will be expected to guide these four young adults through very difficult situations they're going to find themselves in, without having any option to go back and change your mind. This is because there are no save options outside of the autosave, which is at the very start of each day. So if you make a bad decision that lands you in an uncomfortable or really unpleasant situation, you can't just go back and reload a save file. Each and every choice you make will stick with you, no matter how big or how small it may be. And these decisions can range from attempting to placate a racist mugger versus engaging in violence, running from the police or complying with their demands, blowing up your best friend to listen to a painful story from your sister or vice versa, negotiating with a xenophobic shop owner in order to get a very low-paying job, convince your worth as a human being to a group of counter-protesters versus attacking them, and so on. Granted, a lot of the decisions you can make are not going to be as cut and dry as that probably made it out to be. There's no moral compass or alignment gauge to influence the outcome of the game, but those are just a very small handful of all of the decisions you can make through all four of these routes. And these aren't just moments spun from thin air. This isn't just another piece of idealistic American dream bullshit where people are marginalized and beaten down before they overcome all odds to make something of themselves. Kevin Chen, the writer of The Four Horsemen, worked with and interviewed several individuals to hear the stories of what it was like to live as an immigrant or as a child of one, to bring us a game that that told a story, a real story. And a lot of these situations that they found themselves in, I realized, were unpleasantly similar to ones that I myself have found myself in at some point. Now, I'm white, and I was born in Fort Myers, Florida. So I'm not saying that the situations are exactly the same, but as a transgender and asexual person, I have to admit that a story about a marginalized group did resonate with me. There were a few times where I had to call it quits and just take a step back from the game for a day or three, and I couldn't 100% The Four Horsemen because of it. I will get a little more into this later when I talk about the gameplay, but after Pestilence's route, where you struggle and work as hard as you can to gain as much support for your people as possible, only to have it torn away at literally every turn, and then after being betrayed by the one person you can trust, it struck a nerve with me. A really big one. So I didn't get to play Famine's route before reviewing it. I just didn't have it in me. And I feel a little weird about not 100%ing a game before I review it, but But thankfully, The Four Horsemen is not entirely defined by its angst. There is another side of the game that highlights the fact that these are, in fact, teenagers. They're kids squatting in an abandoned military bunker in order to make it their home away from home. They indulge in slash fics and engage in some of the most disgusting iterations of pre-2010 internet lingo I have ever encountered. They question their futures. They sit through their parents' ramblings and bad jokes. They smoke weed and throw parties. They make really fucking terrible EDM jokes. While The Four Horsemen's central theme is of how a group of young immigrants learn to adapt and live in societies that want nothing to do with them, it is also about how a group of young adults live their day-to-day lives together. It also does a damn good job of presenting these personalities. Anyone can create a character with quirks and hobbies, but it takes more than introductory writing skills in order to translate all of that into a personality. The writer's prose further made these characters relatable and their lives believable in creating 4 unique people, which brought an entertainment value to the 4 horsemen rather than just an emotional value created by their situation. What came from this was a series of hilariously #relatable, borderline cringe-inducing scenes as the writer explored these people's interests. Now, granted, some of the humor you may not get if you weren't exposed to some of the content being satirized, like the dramatic reading of War's fanfiction about famine and pestilence, Pestilence's plot-induced nonsense talk, or Death's slang-ridden conversations with their online pals, but I had a ball reading some of these scenes. So, outside of the writing, I want to talk about the gameplay of the 4 Horsemen, because there's actually a nifty little crafting system that I'd like to mention. Every day, you can choose to spend your time in a number of different ways. You can go dumpster diving to acquire trinkets and tools that Death can use to build something for the hideout. You can hang out with Famine's father. You can just relax and let the time pass. You can go shopping for whatever Death says she needs for crafting. If you play your cards right, you can get a job. You can take on the world as a social justice warrior. You can spend your time studying to gain some respectability, and the list honestly does go on. At night, you can do something similar. You can pass the time by pestilence smoking weed, having Death build something, reviewing the shopping list as War, or by checking out what supplies and items you have as Famine. There are a few unlockable interactions, such as having Famine cook really bad food, and having War create flyers, but I can't sit here and list every single thing. Now, for the most part, the game's gameplay is centered on Death's crafting ability, and she can build a lot of shit. Some of it is just stuff to spruce up the bunker, but some of it is story-oriented and required to nudge the game down someone's path. You can tell which is which by whether or not one of the 4 icons is next to the item's name. Similarly to the icons you can see in some of the day and night activities as you move down someone's story. And as you build stuff, it does actually show up in the bunker. So it's nice, even if it doesn't necessarily make anything progress. Now, outside of crafting, I mentioned respectability at one point. You can gain respectability by studying and through some minor interactions with people, and alternatively, you can lose respectability by stealing or by punching fascists in the face. Naturally. Respectability is just that. How well respected your group is in the community. And it does nothing, apparently. I thought it would influence how people treated you, meaning it would make things easier or more difficult for you to acquire things for Death's crafting. But when I emailed the developer to confirm this, he told me that wasn't necessarily the case. It's a red herring, a commentary on a number of conservative advocates, which I thought was clever, but it was wholly frustrating to find out after I had worked my ass off to get respectability as high as I could, which I suppose was the point. However, respectability does play a role in Pestilence's route when the group becomes activists and respectability is replaced by popular support. Popular support affects a lot of your gameplay, from earned income to press coverage. But popular support is so fucking difficult to manage when you have xenophobic mobs attacking your message during process to bring your respectability down, that I can't imagine anyone actually being able to manage it enough to where it actually brings some sort of considerable advantage. Which, again, more commentary. I love this game's message, but it was so exhausting to play because of it. Now, moving on. There is something of a combat mechanic in the 4 Horsemen, which doesn't necessarily impact Death's crafting, but is affected by it, or influenced, I suppose. As I mentioned earlier, there are going to be moments where you can de-escalate a volatile situation when racists will approach you in public, or you can stand your ground and fight them. The combat itself is pretty simplistic, merely pressing an arrow key once the prompt appears on the screen, or choosing to ignore it. But should War choose to engage in violence, you can have Death create different weapons for you. TLDR, The 4 Horsemen was one of the best OELVNs I have ever played and probably ever will play. It is exceptionally well written with a very distinct narrative style and unforgettable dialogue. The art style used is deceptively fun and colorful, and it is complemented by what I can only describe as a gratuitous use of ATL. The soundtrack was unique and super cool, and I don't know what the genre is, but it was like way hipster. And it had layers and layers of gameplay to it. So not only is there a shit ton of replay value and there's a lot of gameplay and just, quality everywhere. I mean, mean, if anything, just play this for the story. It's so good, and it's something I feel like everyone should experience. But anyways, those are my thoughts on the Four Horsemen. If you've played it, let me know what your favorite story was in the comments below. Otherwise, you can find all of my social media as well as my Patreon in the description. Happy unbirthday, and remember that Senpai loves you. Bye!